You're at the ATM withdrawing $40 when you notice something on the screen, your checking account balance, and for the first time in what feels like forever, seeing that number doesn't make your stomach drop. It doesn't trigger that immediate mental calculation of what bills are coming, what you can't afford this week, what disaster might be lurking around the corner. You just see the number, and you feel fine. Not rich, not comfortable, exactly, just fine. And that feeling, that absence of panic, is so unfamiliar that it almost startles you. This is what happens when you cross $10,000 in savings. The stress doesn't disappear completely, but it fundamentally changes character. It shifts from this suffocating, constant pressure to something you can actually manage. And most people have no idea this threshold even exists, because they've been told that financial peace requires way more money than that. Here's what nobody tells you about money stress. It's not actually about the amount you have. It's about the gap between what could go wrong and your ability to handle it. When that gap is wide, stress is constant. When that gap narrows, stress fades. And $10,000 is the specific amount where, for most people, that gap finally closes enough to breathe. Let me show you what I mean. Think about the last time something unexpected happened financially. Maybe your car needed work. Maybe you got hit with a medical bill. Maybe your hours got cut at work. Before you have savings, these events don't just create problems, they create cascading crises. You can't pay for the car, so you put it on a credit card. Now you're paying interest. The interest means you can't pay off other debt. That debt means you're more stressed. That stress means you sleep poorly. Poor sleep means you perform worse at work. Worse performance means you don't get the raise. No raise means you stay stuck. It's not one problem, it's a chain reaction of problems, each one making the next one worse. And that's what creates the crushing, inescapable feeling of financial stress. It's not just about today, it's about the awareness that any small disruption could trigger a downward spiral you have no way to stop. $10,000 breaks the chain. It doesn't prevent problems from happening, but it prevents problems from multiplying. Your car needs work, you pay for it. The problem is solved. No credit card, no interest, no cascade, just a problem that got handled, and now it's over. That's what people mean when they say emergency funds reduce stress. It's not about having money, it's about stopping problems from becoming disasters. But here's where it gets more interesting. Money stress doesn't just affect your finances, it affects everything. Your health, your relationships, your career, your ability to make good decisions. And when you cross $10,000, all of these areas start improving in ways that seem almost unrelated to money itself. Let's start with decision-making. When you're financially stressed, your brain operates differently. Neuroscientists have found that scarcity, including financial scarcity, actually changes how your prefrontal cortex functions. This is the part of your brain responsible for planning, impulse control, and complex problem solving. Under financial stress, this area underperforms. You become more impulsive. You have trouble thinking long-term. You make decisions based on immediate relief, rather than future benefit. This isn't a character flaw. It's physiology. Your brain is prioritizing short-term survival over long-term optimization because that's what brains do under threat. But it means that when you're broke, you're not just broke. You're broke and making worse decisions, which keeps you broke. It's a trap that's invisible to people who haven't experienced it. After $10,000, your prefrontal cortex gets its function back. Not completely, but enough that you can start thinking clearly again. You can plan. You can delay gratification. You can evaluate trade-offs rationally instead of just grabbing whatever provides immediate relief. And that shift in cognitive function affects every subsequent decision you make. Here's a concrete example. You're at the grocery store, and you see that your favorite ice cream is on sale. Before $10,000, if you're stressed about money, your brain does this. It's on sale. I should buy it now, even though I wasn't planning to. Because what if it's not on sale next time, and I want it then? So you buy it. You save $2 on ice cream. But you also just spent $8 you weren't planning to spend. Do this across 20 different decisions in the store, and you've blown your grocery budget without meaning to. After $10,000, your brain does this. Do I want ice cream this week? No? Then I don't need to buy it just because it's on sale. The cognitive load required to make that decision drops dramatically because you're not operating from scarcity. You're just deciding what you actually want. This happens dozens of times per day across every spending category, and the cumulative effect is enormous. Money stress also affects your sleep. And poor sleep affects everything else. When you're financially stressed, your cortisol levels stay elevated, especially at night. Cortisol is supposed to spike in the morning to wake you up and drop at night so you can sleep. But chronic stress keeps it high all the time. You lie awake at night running calculations, checking your bank balance on your phone, worrying about scenarios that haven't happened yet. Even when you do fall asleep, the quality is poor. You don't get enough deep sleep or REM sleep, which are the stages where your brain actually recovers and processes information. You wake up tired. You're irritable all day. You make worse decisions because you're cognitively impaired from lack of sleep, and the cycle continues. $10,000 doesn't fix sleep problems caused by other things, but it fixes sleep problems caused by financial anxiety. Your cortisol levels normalize because your brain stops perceiving constant financial threat. You fall asleep faster. You stay asleep longer. You wake up actually rested, and that improved sleep creates a positive feedback loop. Better sleep means better decisions. Better decisions mean better financial outcomes. Better outcomes mean less stress. Less stress means better sleep. Let's talk about what this does to your career, because this is where money stress has some of its most invisible costs. When you're financially stressed, you can't take risks, and in most careers, the inability to take risks means the inability to advance. Your boss offers you a challenging project that could lead to a promotion, but it means working longer hours for the same pay in the short term. If you're broke, you can't do it. You need those hours for a side hustle, or you need that energy for a second job, so you say no. The project goes to someone else. They get the promotion. You stay where you are. Or maybe you see a job posting for a better position, but it's at a different company. If you're broke, you can't afford to take time off for interviews. You can't afford to risk your current position by being too obvious about job searching. You can't afford the gap between jobs if the timing doesn't line up perfectly, so you stay put. The opportunity passes, someone else takes it, or maybe you need to move to a city with better opportunities in your field. If you're broke, moving is impossible. You can't afford the deposit on a new place. You can't afford the moving costs. You can't afford the month or two it might take to find work in the new location. So you stay where you are, even though you know you're limiting your earning potential by being in the wrong place. After $10,000, all of these calculations change. You can take the challenging project because you're not desperate for every dollar. You can interview for new jobs because you have the flexibility to take time off. You can move to a better city because you have the cash to handle the transition. And these aren't small differences. These are career-defining moments that determine whether you advance or stagnate. Here's what's wild. The person with $10,000 saved often starts earning more money without actively trying, not because the money attracts opportunities, but because the absence of financial stress changes how they show up. They're more confident in meetings. They're more willing to speak up with ideas. They're more likely to ask for what they want. They're better at networking because they're not approaching every interaction from a place of desperation. Confidence isn't something you fake. It's something that emerges naturally when you have options. And $10,000 gives you options. Now let's address something that most financial advice completely misses: the relationship between money stress and your physical health. Chronic financial stress doesn't just make you feel bad, it makes you sick, literally. Elevated cortisol over long periods suppresses your immune system. You get colds more often. Infections last longer. Inflammation throughout your body increases, which raises your risk for basically every chronic disease, heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, you name it. Financial stress also changes your eating habits in ways that compound health problems. When you're stressed and broke, you tend to eat worse, not because you don't know better, but because decision fatigue is real and healthy food requires more mental energy. Planning meals, cooking, cleaning up. When you're exhausted from financial stress, you grab whatever is easiest: fast food, frozen meals, whatever requires the least cognitive load. After $10,000, this pattern often reverses, not because you suddenly became a health fanatic, but because you have the mental bandwidth to think about food as something other than just fuel to get through the day. You can plan meals, you can cook, you can make choices based on what's actually good for you instead of just what's convenient. The same thing happens with exercise. Before $10,000, working out feels like a luxury you can't afford. Not just the cost of a gym membership, but the time and energy. You're exhausted from stress and poor sleep. You're working multiple jobs or long hours. Exercise is the first thing that gets cut. After $10,000, you have the energy to actually care about your physical health again. You start walking. You find ways to exercise that don't cost money, and the improved physical health further reduces stress, which creates another positive feedback loop. Let's talk about relationships, because money stress is absolutely brutal on relationships. When you're financially stressed, you're irritable. You snap at people you love. You're less patient. You're less present. It's not that you're a bad person, it's that your nervous system is in a constant state of activation, and that affects every interaction you have. Money is also one of the leading causes of arguments in relationships. But here's what's interesting. Most money fights aren't actually about money. They're about stress. When you're broke, every spending decision feels high stakes. Your partner buys something that seems frivolous to you, and you explode. Not because you're actually angry about that specific purchase, but because you're carrying so much background stress that any trigger sets you off. After $10,000, money fights don't disappear completely, but their frequency and intensity drop dramatically. You're not constantly on edge. You can have rational conversations about spending instead of emotional explosions. You can disagree about money without feeling like your survival is threatened. This alone probably saves more relationships than people realize. There's also a social dimension to money stress that's hard to talk about but incredibly important. When you're broke, you avoid social situations. Not because you don't want to see people, but because social situations cost money. Going out to eat, buying drinks, attending events, even just the transportation costs can be prohibitive. So you make excuses. You say you're busy, or you're tired, or you're not feeling well. And maybe those things are partially true, but really, you're broke, and you're embarrassed to say so. Over time, this isolation compounds. You lose touch with friends. You miss out on networking opportunities. You become increasingly disconnected from the social fabric that actually helps people get ahead. After $10,000, you can participate in social life again. Not extravagantly, but normally. You can grab coffee with a friend. You can attend the occasional event. You can be part of your community, and that social connection creates opportunities. Job leads, helpful advice, emotional support that were unavailable when you were isolated by financial stress. Here's something that might surprise you. $10,000 changes how you think about time. Before this amount, time feels scarce because you're always trying to squeeze more money out of every available hour. You work extra shifts, you take side gigs, you say yes to overtime even when you're exhausted because you need the money right now. After $10,000, you can start valuing your time differently. Not that you suddenly become lazy or stop working, but you can be more selective. You can turn down the side gig that pays poorly relative to the stress it causes. You can skip the overtime shift to attend your kid's recital. You can spend a Sunday recovering instead of working. This isn't irresponsible, it's strategic, because rest and relationships and mental health all contribute to your long-term earning potential in ways that grinding yourself into dust doesn't. Let's talk about the identity shift that happens at this level, because this is really where everything changes permanently. Saving $10,000 requires you to become a different type of person. Someone who can consistently choose long-term benefit over short-term gratification. Someone who can stick to a plan even when it's boring or hard. Someone who can say no to things they want because they're prioritizing something more important. Most people try to save money without changing their identity. They just try to be disciplined for a while. But discipline is a limited resource. It runs out. What doesn't run out is identity. When you become the type of person who saves money, not someone who's trying to save, but someone who does, the behavior becomes automatic. You don't need discipline anymore. You're just doing what people like you do. This identity shift affects everything that comes after. Once you prove to yourself that you can save $10,000, saving the next $10,000 is easier, not just because you have momentum, but because you've updated your self-concept. You're not someone who's bad with money. You're someone who has $10,000 saved, and that person makes different choices than the person you used to be. Here's what $10,000 is not. It's not retirement. It's not financial independence. It's not wealth. You're still working. You still have bills. You're not buying a house with this money or taking a year off to travel. This is not the destination, but it is the foundation. And you can't build anything lasting without a foundation. The reason most people never build wealth isn't that they don't earn enough, it's that they never create stability. They're constantly in crisis mode, rebuilding from zero every time something breaks. $10,000 is what finally stops that cycle. It's the amount that keeps problems from becoming disasters. And once problems stop multiplying, you can actually start making progress. Here's the practical reality. If you make $40,000 a year and you save aggressively, you can hit $10,000 in about a year, maybe 18 months. If you make more, it's faster. If you make less, it takes longer, but it's still possible. The timeline is achievable enough that you can actually believe in it. And that belief matters, because you're not going to save consistently for some abstract goal that feels 10 years away, but you will save for something you can reach in 12 months. And here's what's remarkable. The habit you build while saving that first $10,000 is worth more than the money itself. You learn to track your spending. You learn to distinguish between wants and needs. You learn to delay gratification. You learn to optimize your finances. These skills don't go away after you hit $10,000. They compound for the rest of your life. The first $10,000 is hard because you're building it from a position of stress and scarcity. Every dollar saved feels like a sacrifice. But after you cross this threshold, the next $10,000 is noticeably easier. Not because you're making more money necessarily, but because you're no longer operating from crisis mode. You've freed up cognitive resources. You're making better decisions. You're spending less on stupid stuff. The momentum builds. Let me be direct about something. Saving $10,000 will require sacrifice. You'll have to say no to things you want. You'll have to live below your means. You'll have to make choices that feel boring or restrictive or unfair. And that's hard, especially when you're already stretched thin, especially when you see other people spending freely, especially when you feel like you've already given up so much. But here's what's on the other side. A version of you that doesn't panic when something unexpected happens. A version that makes decisions based on what makes sense, not what you're afraid of. A version that sleeps through the night. A version that has the mental clarity to actually build something instead of just surviving. A version that can finally breathe. Money stress doesn't go away completely at $10,000, but it changes from overwhelming to manageable, from constant to occasional, from something that controls your entire life to something you deal with when it comes up. And that shift from unmanageable to manageable, that's what changes everything. The stress doesn't fade because you're rich. It fades because you've built a buffer between yourself and disaster. You've created breathing room. You've given yourself options. And options are what transform stress from this crushing, inescapable force into something you can actually handle. So if you're lying awake at night running financial calculations in your head, I want you to know it doesn't have to be like this forever. The stress you're carrying isn't permanent. The anxiety isn't who you are. It's what you're experiencing because of where you are financially. And where you are can change. $10,000 won't solve every problem, but it will solve the problem of constant, overwhelming, crushing financial stress. And once that weight lifts, you'll be amazed at how much energy you have for everything else, for building a career, for nurturing relationships, for taking care of your health, for actually enjoying your life. The path is straightforward. Save $10,000. Not for a vacation or a purchase or a goal. Save it for breathing room, for stability, for the ability to handle whatever comes without falling apart. Because once you have that foundation, everything else becomes possible. People with $10,000 don't have less stress because they have more money. They have less stress because they've crossed the threshold where money stops being an existential threat and becomes something they can actually manage. And that's where financial progress actually begins.